The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
In Oshkosh, Cheryl Hentz here, and I'm very pleased on this edition to be joined by Sue Ponick, who is with the Oshkosh Area United Way, although what we're going to be talking about tonight is not a United Way thing necessarily, and Winnebago County Executive Mark Harris is here, and thanks to both of you for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. We appreciate it very much. What we're going to be talking about tonight is something very new. It is called the Self-Sufficiency Project. It is a community-wide initiative, and I know absolutely nothing about this, so I'm going to be learning right along with all of you. So anyway, thanks again for being here. And you just before we went on the air said it's addressing poverty issues in the community. So let's get the basics, the who, what, where, when, why, and how.
Okay, well, I was going to say we're from the government and we're here to educate you, but I'm not from the government, so I can't say that. But we're from the community and we're here to educate you. Actually, there's a number of communities that have been trying to address poverty issues. We have been looking at poverty for a number of years with the life reports that have been happening in our community. And LIFE stands for Local Indicators for Excellence, and so that allows us to identify issues in our community. And while our poverty statistics are fairly low compared to other communities our size, we seem to be growing in poverty quicker than some of those other communities. Mm-hmm. So where we might be here on our poverty level and another community might be here, their rate of growth is slower and ours is starting to catch up to them, and we don't know why that's happening. So one of the initiatives is to try to identify what are some of the barriers to poverty, what are people dealing with in poverty, people who live in poverty, what are they dealing with, and then how can we bring people to self-sufficiency, because that's really what the goal is to provide the services when they need them, but hopefully get people to a level that they won't need as many services.
Okay, and so obviously you're working with Winnebago County. Who else is working on this collaborative effort with you all?
Well, it's really a collection of individuals, and none of the organizations are necessarily partners as organizations.
Okay.
But a lot of people from the different foundations, from the not-for-profit community, from the school system, we're all collaborating. And initially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to define poverty.
It's tough to define, especially when it's like a
very much
moving
so.
target.
It's very much.
It keeps changing.
We're trying to do some strategic planning around it. We've got 3 project teams. I can talk a little bit about what each of those was charged with. And we're trying to create a public voice on poverty, because for most people, poverty can be really invisible to you. You don't see the hardships it's causing,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't see the way in which it's starting to become generational, where if a family gets trapped into poverty, it's becoming, my belief is it's becoming more difficult for that family to come out of the poverty and become self-sufficient again. So there's 3 subgroups.
But before we get to the subgroups, we do have a leadership team that is really directing the effort. I mean, a lot of this happened around drinking cups of coffee and talking about some of the needs.
Some coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the time I get home, it's too late for anything else. But drinking cups of coffee and talking about what are the poverty issues or what are the issues facing our community. So it's groups, I don't know, people representing AdvoCap, it's people representing the public library, the community foundation, the county, the city, United Way, Head Start is involved, UW Oshkosh is involved. We have people who actually have been or currently do live in poverty represented on our leadership team. And then of course the school district is involved because many times they see it firsthand of what's happening to children who are living in poverty. And so they've witnessed this for a long, long time.
Okay.
And then we just have concerned individuals. But we've tried to keep our leadership team in a manageable size so that we could move forward. And that's where Mark was talking about. We have these other teams then that are kind of the expanse of that, because then UW Extension gets involved in a number of other people. So now I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay.
One of the primary goals is to do this plunge project, and it's to take people who might not otherwise be familiar with the level and extent of poverty in the community and take them on a bus tour to some of the locations maybe where poor people are being assisted, to kind of let them see the broad spectrum of people that are caught in poverty and some of the needs that organizations are trying to meet, as well as some of the unmet needs. So that's the plunge team. They're going to organize this bus tour for some influential people in the community and some business leaders to help expose them to poverty, to kind of help bring them on board in addressing it. There's a dashboard committee.
Before you move on, I'm going to jump in
Okay.
again, because one of the key leaders in the poverty plunge is Theta Care. And they're also on the leadership team. And they've done these in other communities. And so they have a proven record of doing these plunges around poverty, around other issues, transportation, healthcare, whatever it might be. And so they're, in a sense, the leaders behind the plunge. And then we're providing all that local flavor to this plunge.
Is it your sense that, because you're doing these bus tours, taking them to places where people in poverty are being served or serviced, do you feel that maybe they don't really know how bad the poverty is in their area or how it affects people? Or what are you really trying to accomplish by exposing them to that situation?
Well, both. I think they don't realize the difficulties that are there, and I think they also don't realize the extent of poverty in our community. And so, did you want to give these numbers, or do you want me to talk about this?
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, just one measure of poverty might be the number of children in the community that have free or reduced lunches, because that's based on 130% of the federal poverty guidelines, and 36% of our elementary students their families are at that 130% or below, and which is, that's a range about $21,200 of family income that. And of course it varies with family size, but where it becomes very hard to provide food, shelter, and transportation. 33% of middle school students are also in that category, and 25% of high school students. So what that's telling us is that the amount of poverty is much more significant than most people would realize.
Now, I'm just going to let you know that was what we quoted from the Life Report when we got the statistics for 2008, but actually those are 2005-06 school year statistics, and so it could actually be higher.
Yeah, our sense is that it's growing.
I would say probably so too, just with the economy and what's happened with it in the last couple of years, so many layoffs, people unable to get credit for this, that, and the other, and taking this plunge project, this bus tour thing is a great idea, and yet there's probably a lot more people out there affected by poverty issues, as I'm sure you both know, that you can't see. They're like the invisible poverty-stricken people in our community.
Absolutely.
And and like I said before, it's a moving target. You can't. It's hard to put a face on it.
Although we've tried.
Yes, and because it keeps changing, it's hard.
And that's what the next committee. The next committee is the dashboard committee.
Okay, dashboard committee.
And think of a dashboard of a car, and you've got the temperature gauge and the fuel gauge and the speedometer. They're looking for ways for us to measure poverty and to see how it's changing. Okay. So their goal was to, kind of find more metrics to to find out what's going on and how it's changing over time with regard to poverty.
And in a sense, let's move the needle, you know, so that we're getting more people towards the self-sufficiency.
Right, right.
And then the last subcommittee was the barrier subcommittee. And what they were looking at is what are the barriers to self-sufficiency? What prevents someone from getting out of the grip of poverty? And what are some of the gaps in the social services that serve that community? We know that there is some help out there, but it doesn't do everything. And just to give you one example, transportation's a big problem for people in poverty. And the bus system is definitely helping people in poverty have some transportation. But the buses don't run 24/7. So, for instance, if you're trying to find work, and maybe it's a little easier to find second and third shift work, but can you get transportation to hold that job?
Right.
So that would be an example of a barrier. Or, you know, some of the gaps are that maybe you can go into food share and you can get basically food stamps to help with food, but you can't buy personal products. You can't buy toilet paper or deodorant or shampoo with food stamps. So there's a gap in service. I mean, there's clearly still an unmet need, and one that'll hold you back. I mean, imagine if you don't have shampoo in your household and you're going to a job interview. That holds you back.
Yeah.
So those three committees were given different instructions. At this point, we're still kind of at the research stage of things, although we're approaching our first plunge. But the goal is to actually come up with some actionable items, things that can actually be done either with the help of the business community or perhaps the county or some other government entity could play a role, but to kind of fill a couple of these gaps or do something that will help people climb out of poverty or have less people fall into it. And
the other part of that too is ways that we can educate the rest of the community, because I know a lot of people would like to be involved in the plunge, but we have a limited amount of space that we can do this with. So we're hoping to get key people to get involved in the plunge. Afterwards, they'll be able to talk about what they've learned, but then about 2 weeks afterwards, we're going to pull them all together to start to let that resonate, let that sink into them. And then 2 weeks later or so, we're going to pull that group back together and say, okay, let's start talking about what do you feel like about this now? And what do you think we can do? And what are some possible solutions? And then within those solutions, how can we get the rest of the community involved?
Okay, all right. How long has this, I mean, you've obviously done a whole lot of background work here. How long has this idea sort of been simmering and starting to, you know, unfold a little bit here?
Has it been about 1.5 years maybe?
yes.
Oh, is this the thing that I first heard about some time ago?
Yes.
Okay, because I had you guys, your names were on a list of someone who was going to be working on poverty type issues, and I never heard anything more about it. And so isn't that funny? Now it's come up. So
Well,
okay.
we had a lot of people that were interested, but we knew if the group got too large from the beginning, we would never be able to know what direction to go in, because everyone would have a special interest that they want us to move in. So we had a very small, well, I wouldn't say so small, it was probably 20 people from the Living Healthy Community Clinic, Father Carr's Place to Be, a couple of business people, UW, Oshkosh, Fox Valley Tech. So we had like a steering committee that started out first. And then from that steering committee, we formed those other 3 committees. Some of us stayed on the leadership and others went to the barriers or the dashboard committee. And then now, once the plunge goes, then they'll start coming up with solutions that will go out to the rest of the community. So there's going to be time for a lot of involvement coming soon. But again, if you have too large a group to begin with, you end up just spinning your wheels.
Right.
You know, the issue is so large, and there's so many different ways you could help. But if we can identify some things that we can accomplish, you know, whether it would be improving transportation on different time shifts, or, you know, maybe someone has difficulty finding employment because they don't have access to a computer, maybe, you know, enhancing people's access to a computer. I mean, I'm just coming up with examples off the top of my
sure.
head.
Yeah.
But we know there's all these different things that are holding people back. And if we can even address just a few of them, and then maybe over time move on to address a few more, maybe we can help people get back on their feet. I think people don't realize what people really want is a job that they can support themselves and their family on. And to the extent that we can help people overcome barriers to be fully employed, that would be a huge help. But we even have people who are employed full time, but if your wage is low enough and you have children, you can find that you're still in poverty, even working a full shift. So there's just a lot of things to be looked into and a lot of possible areas that we might focus on to take action.
Well, and it's, it is because it's such a large issue that how do you even begin to scratch the surface? You scratch a little bit here and think you're solving a problem or getting to solve a problem, and that scratching of that surface, erupts 5 or 6, maybe 10 more things that, oh gosh, I didn't think about those things.
Right. Well, when the barriers group or the dashboard group was looking at things, what they ended up looking at is food security. Okay, how do we manage that? Well, we tend to be okay in the area of food security if people take advantage of pantries and the meal programs and those kinds of things. But then housing. I mean, it's for me to donate money or food to a food pantry, I can do that and I can help somebody. But what do? I can't invite somebody necessarily into my home to live with me. So there's a problem there. And if we don't have affordable, accessible housing for people, then what do? Employment was the other issue that Mark talked about. And healthcare is a huge issue. Not only physical healthcare, but mental health and dental health. So I said mental and dental. That's kind of hard to say. But we have people suffering with mental illness and for whatever reason may not be able to hold a job. Well, the county tends to take very good care of them. They're on different programs and there are services out. But if you don't have a mental illness, if you just need health care and it's not available to you or not affordable to you, we know that Badger Care is there for people, but they had to limit it because it was so popular, and dental care is just through the roof. We have Tri-County Dental Clinic that services our community, but it's really emergency care. And so now we're trying to teach prevention and those kinds of things for people. Education is another piece. Some people never really had an opportunity for a good education, and so they're limited by that. And now to be able to go back to school is hard for them, but that's maybe what they need to get a good job. And for some people, that's what they need to keep a good job, because it's not just I go to work and I do my job now. Now I have to read a manual. Now I have to operate a computer. If I don't have those kinds of skills, I'm at jeopardy of losing my job. And people fear about those kinds of things all the time. And then childcare is another issue. Is, okay, I've got 3 kids. I need to get this job. I can do the second shift job, but the transportation might be an issue. Childcare might be an issue. Then what do I do? So, some people just can't take those jobs. And with more single heads of household, it becomes more difficult. And then there's that whole piece where people don't have the family structure that we might have grown up with in that support system.
Right. One of the, we talked to a lot of people from different agencies that help the poor. And one of the comments that sticks in my mind is that because you have all these different agencies, but their mission is fairly narrowly defined, is that people are sometimes shuttled from agency to agency, trying to see if that agency can give them help. But maybe their circumstances fall a little bit outside of that box of service that each of them has. Well, if you're poor and have transportation issues, to have to go to one place and fill out paper and then come back another time to find out you don't qualify and be sent to another, that's a real difficult situation. So one of the service providers said, it's expensive to be poor because you have all this expensive transportation to seek the help even when it's available. Another issue that we might not think about is that, even as we have things like Badger Care and expanded insurance, if the administration of that insurance and the reimbursements are too low, that doesn't necessarily solve the healthcare problem completely, because just as an example with dental care, with Badger Care, the reimbursements are so low and the paperwork requirements so high that very, very few dentists will accept Badger Care patients. In fact, some dentists are willing to do some dental work for free rather than take Badger Care because it's more expensive for them to take the Badger Care and do the paperwork.
Wow.
than to give the services for free. And the only free clinic in this area is up in Appleton.
Well, Father Carr does do some free dental.
Do they? Good, good.
I didn't even realize that Badger Care covered any dental.
It does, but good luck finding anyone that will take
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Right.
Well, just a couple of things here. You know, you talk about the paperwork. Is there a way, and maybe you guys have already in one of your committees or subcommittees, you know, given some thought to this, but is there a way to either streamline the paperwork? And that might be difficult because you've got different agencies that have different requirements. But maybe when someone's going to fill out paperwork, have them fill out paperwork for every possible contingency and then distribute that out to the different agencies? I mean, is that a possibility?
Actually,
that could work. And sometimes agencies will say, well, you know, there's confidentiality issues. You know, I always think you can get around those. If somebody wants and needs help, I think they're pretty open to letting that confidentiality issue go by. And I've had it happen to me where I've talked with somebody and I said, do you give me the permission to talk with this person? And they'll say, yes, go by all means.
Have a waiver signed on the bottom of the form.
Really, that's it.
You
That's
know,
all it
that's
takes.
the key.
well, there is the 211 system where people can call and they can get a lot of information about all the different services. But I think sometimes it still requires a human element. So,
Well, there's human beings answering that phone, but the face-to-face, you mean?
but really, if there was a social worker devoted to helping people in poverty access programs outside of government that would help coordinate that would probably add a lot of efficiencies. So that clearly would help, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Also, if the different agencies, and then they do make some effort at this, but if the different agencies are somehow helped to stay current on what programs all the other agencies are offering, oftentimes someone will go to one agency for a service, and if they're very astute on what's available in the community, they may help guide those people to other services and have some sense of what the requirements are, so they're not just sending them blindly.
Yeah.
But you really need someone to coordinate that to make sure that the frontline employees in all these different agencies are somehow kept abreast of what's available everywhere else. And you know, some of these things there's already efforts to do it, but they may not be adequate to the task.
Kind of how we try to do it. You know, we regularly get people into our office that will have a specific need, and a lot of times they'll say, I don't know where else to go, so I've come here. And so I'll say, who else did you talk with? And they've maybe talked with 6 different organizations, and they sent them to another one, sent them to another one. And we just don't send them if we don't have to. And a lot of times we'll call up those agencies and say, can we have an appointment for this person for this reason? And I'll have them talk to them on the phone to make sure that they qualify for the program, because I'm not going to send them there if they don't qualify.
Right.
Or I'll call up a friend of mine and say, okay, this is this person's situation, what can we do for them? Right when the person is still in my office, and then we'll try to figure some things out. Or I might even say, we have this kind of a cheat sheet that we use, and we've taken it off of the 211 database, but we've broken it down by child care and financial assistance or mental health needs. And it's just a whole host of different services in our community. And so if somebody comes into my office, I take that sheet and I'm able to circle things for them and saying, based on what you're telling me, I think these services could help you. Here's the phone number. And if I know a person that they can call, like I'll tell them to call Ann over at the county if it's food share programs, or I'll tell them to call Kathy over at Wisconsin Public Service if they're having problem paying their bill. Ask for this person and tell them that Sue said that you thought I should call. And it's a personal approach that then they have somebody. I mean, if Kathy gets a call from somebody that says, Sue Ponick said I should call, Kathy's going to know that that person came to the United Way office, talked with us, and I'm recommending that she call Kathy. So Kathy maybe takes it just a little bit more serious in that way. Because Kathy's always going to take it serious, but she's going to deal with that person knowing that they've talked with us already.
And the group's not quite at the point where we're proposing specific solutions yet, but I think we've done our homework that we're very close to the point where the group will come back together after this plunge and start floating ideas of what we think some of the solutions are. And again, we probably would be addressing a few small aspects initially, but one of the things you've said ties in with something I believe, that if we could have a more standardized application form, and that maybe that application form would be filled out at one agency, but that it would be good for applying for help at several, and that could then be inputted in line and sent to all of them, so that before you send somebody over, let's say before you send them to the food pantry, that data is already available for the food pantry for them to say, sure, they meet the requirements we have, send them over and we can help them. Something like that would save a lot of the frustration and a lot of the expense.
Well, and the footsteps that they're making, you know. Sue, you had said to me that this was kind of patterned after a project up in the Fox Cities. How long did it take them, if you know, to really get their whole project organized, and how successful is it?
You know,
now I've put you on the spot.
You have, because I'm not exactly sure how long. It seems like it's been a really long time, and I hesitate to say 5 years, but it could be that long already. Mark and I went to a breakfast up there, I want to say at least 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh,
so it probably is a good 5 years that they've been doing something. And you know, they started with a number of different activities to do, like a community read, and then they did some simulation activities, which I've done some poverty simulation activities, and I can attest to what Mark was saying, that it's expensive to be poor. Because you have to pay for, basically, that transportation piece kills you all the time. But they've done a number of different activities, and I get reports from what they've been doing. I don't always read them all the time, but I think that they have been successful in some areas and feel that they could be more successful in other areas. But they do have good community buy-in for a lot of their projects.
Sure.
And while we're in many ways patterning ourselves after them and Project Hope up in Green Bay, we are also a different community and want to make sure that what we do really fits the needs of people in our community in the southern part of Winnebago County.
Okay.
But I think, you know, if we can bring the business community and get them to appreciate how big the problem is, that they may choose existing agencies to become more involved with. I mean, the more you see the poverty, the more you understand it, it's bound to lead to more organizations doing more to help.
Well, and the thing is, in so many cases, someone that we all know is affected by poverty. It may be on a very small scale, but nonetheless, it's one of those invisible type situations in many, many cases. And I think people would be amazed if they knew how many of their friends or neighbors were really affected by the issue.
I mean, I can tell you, when I first came to town, and it's been a lot of years already, but when I first came to town, I always would go out and visit the agencies, and I'd always, maybe once or twice or maybe 3 times a year, go to the Salvation Army and have lunch. And I would invite anyone to go there, and if you can afford to pay for lunch, they always have a little kettle that you can put money in. And I found early on that there were a lot of probably more men that would be attending that lunch. And over the years, I've seen more families, and more families with young children. And you can just see the face of poverty changing. One of the projects that we've had a group working on is actually doing interviews with people that are in poverty and trying to find out what it's like. And these are people that have been in the social work program at the university, and very skilled at what they do and very good at making people feel at ease to talk about this, because that's the other thing, is we do not want to embarrass anyone about this issue.
Sure.
Well, and that's another thing we see in addition to the free or reduced lunches. I think the school district is seeing more students that don't have permanent addresses. And you know, that makes you realize how intense this is.
Yeah. We're out of time, guys, but this is so huge. I would like to have you guys back at a later date, maybe after you've done this plunge and a few things have gotten moving a little bit more forward. I'd love to have you back, and we can talk more about it.
So we could have filled the hour.
We could have filled the hour. Yeah, we could have. So anyway, I hope you'll come back.
We would.
In the near future. So
Thank
we're
you.
going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Dear Mom and Dad, well, I finally have some time off, so I'm writing to tell you that I'm doing well. We have good days and bad days over here. We try to remember the good ones and get through the bad ones. Mostly we have each other, and that's what keeps us going. And Mom, since you asked, If anyone wants to help, just tell them to contact the USO. You can't believe how much they do for us. With love, your son, Michael.
Every year, the U.S. Department of the Treasury receives about 1.4 million reports of problems with paper checks. Checks can be lost, stolen, or delayed. If you still receive Social Security payments by paper check, Treasury wants you to know about a safer, more convenient way to get your money. The Direct Express Prepaid Debit MasterCard. The Direct Express card is new and is available to anyone receiving Social Security benefits, even if you don't have a bank account. Your monthly benefits will be automatically placed onto your card account each month on the day your money is due. While other debit cards cost money, it is possible to use the Direct Express card for free to make purchases, pay bills, and get cash at thousands of locations nationwide. There are no sign-up or monthly account fees, no more waiting for the mail, or worrying about lost or stolen checks. Call 1-877-212-9991 or visit www.usdirectexpress.com.
We were in an emergency situation. We don't have extra. We have a little bit of water and a little bit of food. A meeting place, no.
No.
I don't think we have a first aid kit.
We have tuna fish, we have
Right.
beans, we have canned tomatoes,
True.
you know.
That's true, but that's really not survival food. Tomato paste.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oshkosh. I'm joined now by Nichole Hall. She is with the State Department of Corrections. She's been on once before. I think it's probably been about 2.5 or 3 years since you've been on. It's been a little bit. But the last time you were on, we won an award for the show, so that's a good thing. So anyway, we're going to be talking about the sex offender registration program and also some pending legislation that is currently being proposed in Madison that would basically streamline or make uniform sex offender residency. Boy, I'm having a tough time getting that out. Sex offender residency requirements and laws in the state. So we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but first of all, we kind of want to start, I guess, by finding out what a sex offender is, because it's not the face that one might typically think. I think when people hear the word sex offender, they immediately think of child molesters and people who prey on young kids, and that's not always the case.
Right. You make a very good point. When I speak to groups, I often say to them, what comes to your mind when you hear the phrase sex offender? And for many people, it is that case in the media that they've heard about or something that may have happened to them and their family. And there are certain conclusions that are drawn, but a sex offender can range in all different categories. We've had offenders register younger than the age of 10. We've had offenders who have been over 100. We have both male and female offenders. We have different races and ethnicities from different professions. We have people who've never held a job to former corrections officers, police officers, priests, teachers. It really is the whole spectrum. We definitely do have child offenders on the registry. We have those that are truly pedophiles, meaning that they strictly prefer young children and will act on that. We have other incest offenders who perhaps are primarily attracted to adults, but for various reasons offend against children. We have those who offend against adults, some who use force, some who don't. And then we have some of offenders who don't fit into any of those categories. We do have the offenders where the relationship was age prohibited, the otherwise teenage cooperative relationships. Now there is a way in the law that some of those people can be removed from the registry. That's really the only exception. But that gets pretty gray pretty quick. You know, a senior and freshman's one thing, but what about 19 and 20 versus a 14 and 15-year-old? So I just really encourage people when they hear the phrase sex offender in the media to really think critically about what that may or may not mean.
Well, and you see it on the blogs. You know, right. People really, they have this negative idea when they hear about sex offenders. And the most recent one was with the story that the Northwestern did about the change in the law that's being proposed. And, you know, some of these people are just up in arms over this, and they right away think child molester.
Right.
And that's just the wrong way to think.
Right. I mean, it may be. I think when you hear that someone is a sex offender, you really just need to know more. And I think one important component about sex offending is that
the vast majority of offenders know their victims. That's perhaps the biggest myth about sex offenders, is that it's going to be that worst case scenario that people hear about in the media that's often, unfortunately, sensationalized about the offender who chooses a stranger victim, abducts them, and we've all heard those stories, and understandably that's every parent's greatest fear, but really their greatest fear should be somebody they know.
Well, and I know we're going to get into this later, but in a case like that, because it's someone that you know, that's why some of these residency laws that different communities have put in place aren't working.
Exactly.
And they're really kind of moot.
Exactly. Yes.
What, under Wisconsin law, Nichole, what is the definition of a sex offender?
Well, a sex offender can be defined many ways. I mean, the law even defines it many ways. So I think it's important for the purposes of our conversations, we're normally talking about registered sex offenders, meaning somebody who's been caught, either adjudicated delinquent as a juvenile or convicted as an adult of a sex offense, either by engaging in sexual behavior that was prohibited by law, meaning the person was not old enough to give consent, or there was force involved in that sexual activity.
Okay, all right. And I've seen you on TV, besides on Eye on Oshkosh. You've done a lot of the neighborhood notification programs when a sex offender who's registered and has to, they're moving into a certain neighborhood. And in not all cases do you have to do notification programs like the full-blown programs, but you have done those on TV, and you have a PowerPoint presentation that I think you use at those, or do you use that PowerPoint somewhere else?
I do use it at those meetings and other places.
And what are some of the main points in the PowerPoint that you try to make for people?
Well, we've touched on some of the main ones, is that really there's no such thing as a typical sex offender. Really the only common thread that sex offenders have that I've seen is that they thrive on secrecy. And so that's really the crucial thing about the sex offender registry, is that it takes away the secrecy that sex offenders have historically thrived on. So prior to 1997, all these same sex offenders were in our community. We simply didn't know about it. Now that we know, that's the most critical step to keeping your family safe. Another important point that I stress is, again, most offenders know their victims. And so if people spend all their time focusing on the stranger in the bushes, they'll miss it. They'll miss the real threat to their kids. And what offenders do along those lines is they groom their victims. So basically that's a process of manipulation. They groom the child as well as the family most of the time to really gain trust. So to decrease the child's resistance, to decrease the chances that the child will report, and to decrease the likelihood that they'll be believed if they report. So it's a long process, and if people are really looking for that possibility, the odds of them seeing it and stopping it increase dramatically than if they really just think it would be a stranger that would ever hurt their child.
Okay. And are there other points in your PowerPoint presentation that you think would be helpful for our viewers?
Right. Well, our registry, I didn't look at the exact numbers today, but we're well over 21,000 registered sex offenders in the state of Wisconsin. And we grow at a rate of about 100 each month. Breaking that down a little bit, and these are very approximate numbers, but approximately 6,000 of those registered sex offenders are in prison right now. So in addition to being confined, they're listed on our registry. Then about 5,000 are on probation and parole supervision. So they have an agent that is supervising them. There are rules and restrictions, and in many ways there are residency restrictions in that arena. When people are on probation and parole supervision on a case-by-case basis, there are clear restrictions about where they can and can't live. But then there are about 10,000 registered sex offenders that are completely off of probation and parole supervision. They've served their entire sentence as imposed by the court, and therefore the only obligation they have is to register with us, meaning to tell us where they live, work, volunteer, go to school. And then they have to report any changes in that information within 10 days.
And how often, since they're off supervision, how often do you all check on them then?
Well, at a minimum, we send them a registration letter once a year. It has a form on the back that they have to fill out and return to us within 10 days. And then in addition, they report the changes. what's happening in many communities, and the city of Oshkosh is one of them, we have a very close relationship with the police department. So I mentioned the 21,000 sex offenders, and there's about 15 of us statewide that monitor that number. So clearly we can't be everywhere all the time, so we really rely heavily on our local law enforcement. So the Oshkosh Police Department is working with us along with other departments, and they will focus on the 10,000 number that are off probation and parole, because when they're on supervision, the agents are in their homes monthly. I mean, they know where they are. But for the rest, the police department will go and check, are you really where you say you are? And they've been doing that at least twice a year, and that's been a huge advantage to us. Our registry in Wisconsin is above 90% compliance, which is much better than the national average of 76%. So we take the registry very seriously, and we really think that there's a huge advantage to the community to know where the people are and what they've done, because that really gets to the core of that secrecy that we've talked about before.
Sure. Now, of these 10,000 that are off supervision, Nichole, you know, so many people believe that once an offender, always an offender. And that's probably true in many, many cases. Do you know offhand what the rate of recidivism is?
I can give you a general sense. There's many different studies, and they look at many different components of reoffending. But in summary, I can say that the numbers are lower than most people think. Some studies have been as low as 5%. I think more around 15 to 20% is what I've seen. There are some subcategories of sex offenders, like a true pedophile is more dangerous. An offender who offends against stranger victims is more dangerous. But and even when I give those numbers out there, you know, between 5 and 20%, we have to assume that those are low numbers, because most sex offenses are not reported.
No.
But having said all of that, I still think the number is lower than what most people think. When I walked into corrections 15 years ago, I was convinced if they did it once, they'd do it again, and it was my job to, you know, catch them if it happened, hopefully before. And I've softened on that a little bit. There are definitely some people who are dangerous and present a risk to reoffend, but there are others who, if motivated to change, can make changes in their life to not offend again.
Okay. I want to touch on this proposed legislation that's going on, but before we move on to that, are there other things that you think, I mean, this is such a broad area, and we could probably talk for hours about it and still not cover it all, but are there other things that maybe, you know, some bullet point areas that maybe you think are important for viewers to know?
Well, I think for me it comes back to often really, why do we have this registry? You know, is it intended to punish people? Is it intended to, you know, keep people safe? And really the reason we have the registry is because of a young boy named Jacob Wetterling. In 1989, Jacob was 11. He lived in rural Minnesota. He was abducted at gunpoint by a stranger. And it was a horrifying case. And Jacob has never been seen since. And the Jacob Wetterling Foundation was created by his parents and his family, and it's still active today and very proactive in education and prevention. But going back to when this crime happened, law enforcement had very few leads to go on. And one of the things that they took from that was it would have been very helpful for them to at least have a list of the convicted sex offenders in the area. So really that's how this all started. Was they went on a federal level and said, you know, we need the states to have some version of a sex offender registry. And I don't want to lose perspective of that, because as we get into talking about these residency restrictions, they really undermine the sex offender registry and then the intention behind it, which really was, you know, hopefully to prevent any further crimes or abductions, and then if there is one, to give law enforcement a tool in their investigation.
And I think, I'm not certain, but I think we've probably been putting up the website address for the registry, but it's www.widocoffenders.org. So basically it's the abbreviation for Wisconsin, and then Department of Corrections, the abbreviation for that, and then offenders.org. Now, what kind of things can people find there?
They will find, there's several different ways that they can search. So they can search for a specific offender, and we do list aliases and name variations as much as we are aware of. And they can search by their zip code. So they can either go and look for a specific person, or they can type in their zip code and see all a list of names, and they can click on each individual name. And that really is the best place to get information about the sex offender registry. That's, you know, some people still think they should go to law enforcement, but really that's where law enforcement will go, is to the website.
Okay.
So that really is the best place to find that information. we have kind of an exciting new partnership, I'd say in the last 6 months, with familywatchdog.com. And what the gap that they filled was that we really wanted to always have a mapping function on our website, so people could see a map of their area with bullet points of where the registered sex offenders were in comparison to that. But we just simply didn't have the funding. So what we ended up doing was partnering with familywatchdog.com. So we give them our registry information every day, and then they share with us their maps. So through our website, you can link to theirs. You can sign up for email notifications if an offender moves in and out of your area.
And is that any kind of an offender on any level, or is it just...
We don't really do levels in Wisconsin.
Okay.
We have a list of crimes that require registration per law.
Okay.
And law enforcement can choose to do different levels of notification, but it's really an individual choice. It's not necessarily with that offender. It's just the level of notification that's chosen.
So if someone is a registered sex offender, that will be covered under this familywatchdog.com and the mapping, and they'd be getting an email if any kind of an offender moved into their area?
For the most part. I do
Okay.
need to clarify that it's not juvenile offenders,
Okay.
even when they turn 18. So any adult convicted sex offender will appear on our website,
Okay.
and in partnership with that, you can check out the map and sign up for an email notification.
Okay.
And then one other point I wanted to hit is, the registry is very useful, the website's useful, I use it, I encourage people to use it, but I also caution people not to get a false sense of security. Because 21,000 sounds like a horrendously large number, and it is a large number, but really it's the tip of the iceberg. And I actually see that, though, as good news, because at least we know about that 21,000. I'm more concerned about the sex offenders that we don't know about. And there are many, many of them out there that have not been caught.
And are there any dangers in people using this information or having access to it? Are there things that they maybe need to be aware of as they're accessing it? And the reason I ask that is, CCAP is a great thing for being able to access court records, but I have seen people really misuse that. They don't know how, in some cases, they don't know how to read it. They start blabbing on blogs about people who have been, convicted of things when it clearly says charges have been dismissed.
Right.
Little information is a good thing if it's used properly.
Right.
So are there dangers with
Well,
this?
I think I would just really encourage people to know that they have a piece of the information when they see that someone is a registered sex offender. We always provide contact phone numbers. If the person's on probation and parole, they can talk directly to the supervising agent and find out a great deal of information. And then they can know if their fears are justified or not, or what the conditions are. And really then people are our eyes and ears out there too to help us. And then we do caution people not to use the information to harass or for acts of vigilantism, because I shudder to think of what would happen if we lost this law. I would not want to go back to before 1997 and have people not know. And there are some people out there who think that sex offender registries are unconstitutional. And if it starts to become double jeopardy or punishment or harassment, there is the potential we could lose this tool that we have.
And again, some knowledge is better than no knowledge,
Right.
So now if someone signs up for these email notifications, I think the most human reaction probably is, oh my God, there's a sex offender moving into the area. And you become confused, you become hurt, you become angry, scared. It can trigger a whole array of emotions. What's the best way to handle those emotions?
I really encourage people to contact us so that we can share with them a lot of the information I'm sharing today. We can give specifics about that offender that very well may put that person's mind at ease. Often it's not as bad as what people feel, right? And really just an informed community is a safer community. So not just to know about this one person, that's important, but to know about the other people. And what I say to community members, if you've changed your behaviors and you're using more safety precautions because you've learned of sex offenders in your community, if that sex offender moves out, you shouldn't do anything different. Unfortunately, we need to be safe and practice protective behaviors every day. To be honest, I don't check my neighborhood very often at all. Years may pass before I check. Because if there was a registered sex offender in my neighborhood, I probably wouldn't do much different than I do today. And if there was not one, I wouldn't do much different than I do today. I mean, we really just need to be safe all the time.
And can you give a laundry list of things that parents, grandparents, whoever a child may be living with, can put in place to make sure that the children that they're watching over are safe?
How long do we have?
I think we've got about 4 minutes, or no, about 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm kidding. We could do a whole show on prevention and education and safety. Clearly, the biggest key is communication. Always to have open communication with kids. There's a program that when I do prevention education, I rely heavily on called Protective Behaviors. I know Reach Counseling is wonderful and very active in this community, and people can always reach out to them to get tools for family safety. What I really like about Protective Behaviors is it really gives kids a lot of proactive problem-solving skills. So we used to do a lot of stranger danger, right? You know, don't take candy from a stranger, run, kick, yell, you know, kick them you know where, run and scream, right? But we never really talked about what to do if that doesn't work. We give kids maybe one scenario so they can't expand if the scenario is a little different. And kids are rotten at identifying strangers. They really are. And sometimes they need to go to strangers for help. So the whole stranger thing can get really confusing. I take an approach more of, you know, to kids, remember you can talk to someone you trust about anything, no matter how awful or how small. If you were not feeling safe, what are some things you could do? What might your body tell you if you were, kind of that rehearsal type thing. And do a lot of even ifs. You know, what could you do even if? If you hear something on the news that disturbs you as a parent, you know, instead of running to your child and sharing all the intimate details, maybe say, well, what could you do if something like this happened to you? And give a kind of a different version to give them skills. Another website that I really encourage people to look at is darkness2light.org, and it's darkness2light.org. And really, Protective Behaviors looks at family and child safety, but Darkness to Light is a community approach to safety. It's a great website and a good resource for people to look at.
Okay. Well, those are between the state's website and then these other two that you've just given us. That's a good place to start. You know, we hear the worst of the worst, I think, on some of these magazine shows on TV, you know, where they're abducting kids and they're put through horrendous things and then they turn up murdered. And those are horrific, but that's not... Those are probably the exception rather than the rule. What are some of the things that the sex offenders are most commonly doing with children? And again, when we're talking about sex offenders now, we're talking about the ones who do prey on kids.
Okay. Still, it really is about the grooming. It's taking that time to, you know, it's often a scenario, and most of our offenders are male. There are definitely female offenders, but, you know, it's a male offender who's gaining access to a child through a girlfriend, through a wife, through family, somebody who may be in an organization, you know, coaching a team or a role model of some type. Really, that's where it's going to happen, and it's typically going to be a slower process. You know, trying to slowly desensitize the child, you know, maybe starting with back rubs and, you know, tickling and wrestling and things like that, gradually introducing some pornography to kind of desensitize, and then also to say, now look, you've looked at this, now you're going to be in trouble too, so, you know, you can't say anything. I mean, the whole process is very manipulative and disturbing, but it typically takes a while. So again, you know, to really have your eyes wide open all the time, and even if you do everything right as a parent, it still may happen, but I think the odds go way down if we're thoughtful about it and really accept that it could happen. Never to say, well, that person could never do that. He loves kids.
Right. All right. Well, very good. Let's talk about this this law that this proposed legislation that's going on right now. There are more than 20 states that have passed some form of residency restriction that basically prohibits sex offenders from living within a certain distance of schools, daycares, other places that kids go. And then in addition to the state that has done this in these cases, there's communities within those states that have created their own. Now it's being proposed, and currently this is before the State Assembly's Committee on Corrections and Courts in Madison. And I'm losing my voice here. And the legislation would actually nullify local ordinances that have been restrictive in where these offenders can live. This is a good thing, and I know you're in a position where you maybe can't comment on the pros or the cons.
I can.
Okay, good.
I can, yes. You know, residency restrictions are very well intended. They are. And in Wisconsin, how they've happened is community by community, local ordinance by local ordinance. And so the intentions are clearly noble. I mean, everybody wants to protect children.
Sure.
That's why I do what I do. And you know what, if I thought for a minute that they kept communities safer, I would be in support of them as well. But we're really learning that the best intentions don't always have the best results. So, for example, in Iowa, they passed a state law, 2,000 feet, registered sex offender can't live within 2,000 feet of a school daycare park. What they found is that instantly their noncompliance with the sex offender registry doubled. They lost track of half of them because they stopped registering. And I believe now that that's tripled. I think it's increased to 3 times. They also have found 0 reduction in their sex offenses since the restrictions were passed. Florida did it kind of like we've been doing it they did it county by county. So they had this task force, multidisciplinary, from all different sides of the table looked at it. They found that their restrictions led to increased transience, homelessness, and clustering of sex offenders. And I'm here to tell you that a homeless sex offender is not a good thing. I really think that their risk increases. And it's not just me that thinks these restrictions are bad. The Department of Corrections has been in support of this legislation that says that the restrictions are not beneficial. Some groups might surprise you, and I wanted to talk about Jacob Wetterling before because the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, founded by his parents, are opposed to these restrictions. The Iowa County prosecutors are opposed to it. The National Association to End Sexual Violence, so a victim advocacy group, is opposed to it. The Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I mean, the list goes on and on.
So they all want to have a uniform thing from a state that says what the restrictions are.
Actually, what we're finding is restrictions are not helpful.
At all.
Period. They're not.
Okay.
There are some other alternatives that kind of, what do they call them? Where they restrict so a sex offender maybe can't be at a park. Because right now the way these restrictions are written, a sex offender can't live by a park, but he can hang out there all day.
Okay.
So some of those have been considered, but really we found the restrictions are not helpful for a number of reasons. First of all, there's no we really want our legislation to work, and we don't see any evidence that it works. There's really no connection between where a sex offender lives and him offending against a child there.
Because he can go anywhere. He can go to a park.
Exactly. And in fact, some studies that followed some higher risk offenders found the ones that offended against strangers drove more than 3 miles to do it. Again, most sex offenders gain access to victims through people that they know and relationships they already have. And if they're going to offend against a child, it's certainly not happening across the street from their home, the vast, vast majority of the time. Even if sex offenders move like they're supposed to, they still come back to those same communities for whatever had them there in the first place, their job, their family, their connections. But what happens is many of them don't move because either they can't or they won't. And so then now we don't know where they are.
Yeah.
They're registering a false address, but they're really living here. So I actually had someone in the town of Algoma say to me at one point about their restriction, I'm so glad there's no sex offenders here. I just don't know what I would do about my kids. And so really they're under the impression that there's no sex offenders there.
Wow.
And that really defies the whole tip of the iceberg thing. Even if there really are no registered sex offenders there, 80 to 90% of sex offenders still don't get arrested or reported to the police. So they're really just not effective. They give people a false sense of security. And if we had any indication that they were helpful, because it's really not about worrying about the sex offender and whether they're inconvenienced. They definitely need consequences and to be held accountable, but kids' safety trumps all that.
Sure.
And an unstable sex offender is a higher risk to reoffend.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank
It's
you.
always informative and a pleasure. So,
Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to put these website addresses up on our website too.
Great.
So,
Okay.
Anyway, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.